So without further ado, it is my pleasure to announce our first keynote speaker for this closing plenary, Ms. Alice Amorim, head of the COP30 unit for the Brazilian Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. Over to you, Alice.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to those following us online. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here talking to you. On behalf of the COP30 presidency team, I think it's important to remind us all that we are in a very critical moment of our history. I'm pretty sure you have been discussing this throughout the day, and everybody acknowledges that. But why is that? Part of that is, of course, the challenging geopolitical context in which we are facing. And any COP in any moment has always been facing different sorts of crises. But the moment that we are seeing now, it's actually a very critical one if we think about what is our vision, what is our spirit in which we embrace paving the way for the next 10 years or so. This is the first time that we are having a COP in a tipping point, as the Amazon region is the case, in a moment where the world is already facing climate impacts every day, everywhere, all the time. And where we know that the cost of inaction is actually much greater than the cost of action. Science is there, we know that, we have been hearing this. We are also critical to address and thinking about the COP30 process in a moment where the Paris Agreement rulebook has already been agreed. We already have a long history of negotiations, a long history of commitments made in the forest agenda, in the agriculture, in energy transition, in all different sorts of elements of the action agenda, climate action agenda. So we need to make sure that this instrument of multilateralism, as COPs are useful to advance us further. The question that we are asking ourselves every time when we are thinking about the COP30 agenda, the COP30 process, is actually what prevents us from moving forward faster, bolder, in a more inclusive and wider way. So when we discuss our COP30 priorities, and also thinking about how can Brazil actually embrace this idea of leading by example, matching the domestic action with our leadership and our vision to the world, we are actually focusing on three main points. So our three main priorities for COP30 are, first, we need to strengthen multilateralism. So I would say that this is an important phase that we need to have different instruments, different strategies, different mechanisms to do so, understanding that multilateralism is the only way forward in which we can actually tackle the climate agenda and protect our global public goods. The second is actually how can we accelerate and scale climate action? And by that, I mean climate action in all sorts, in all fronts, in mitigation, in adaptation, in building capacity, in actually strengthening technologies, in energy, forestry, agriculture, transport, all different sectors. So we know COPs, especially after Paris, have been doing a lot of that, trying to offer that, but we need to do much more this year and in the next 10 years or so. And the third point is actually to bring COPs and the climate solutions closer to people's lives. So most of you and all of us working on climate, in the climate space for the past 10, 20 years, we know what we mean when we talk about the urgency of accelerating NDCs implementation, of submitting Paris aligned or 1.5 aligned NDCs. But the vast majority of the world do not understand what we mean by that and do not understand what it means if we don't do that to their lives. So actually, it's interesting to see how much of the challenges of belaying and living in the Amazon is something that we need to bring to the heart of the COP, because the pathways of development that we need to have in the world in the next 10 years or so, they need to come with the real world challenges on the ground. So when we talk about action, it's not about commitments or pledges to act, it's actually to deliver action. So how should we do that? How can we use a COP process to do that? First, we are working to focus a lot on the implementation side, but implementation of what? So implementation of the GST. In Dubai, the Dubai Consensus have already put forward negotiated several elements of what we need to happen collectively to actually keep the global temperature below 1.5 degrees. Paragraph 33, I'm pretty sure you have been discussing this with different elements. It's one of those, and we need to make sure that we channel all the different synergies, all the different finances, all the different policy frameworks to actually deliver that. So this is the spirit in which we are focusing our action agenda, our mobilization agenda, our efforts towards the heads of state segments, and of course, the negotiations, which is the core of any COP. So when we think about these synergies, and we need to bring the synergies of the convention, synergies of different action agendas of past COPs, and actually have a much more efficient and focused framework looking ahead to the next 10 years or so, in a way that we have accountability mechanisms, in a way that we understand how much public policies can contribute to that implementation, or that are actually going in the opposite direction of contributing to that. So this is actually across the board, these efforts of streamlining, creating synergies, and being more efficient. It's much more important than bringing new elements or new initiatives to the room. So I just conclude by saying that wanted to invite you all to join our mutirão, as we call it, as Ambassador André called it in the letter, a mutirão that actually values and puts upfront this decentralized collective leadership in finding the solutions. Solutions are with the communities in the forests on the ground. Solutions are at the subnational level. Solutions are with research universities and think tanks and NGOs. Solutions are with state governors, and ultimately, of course, with parties and their capacity. So thank you so much, and have a great discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Alicia, and yes, a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you for sharing this incredibly inspiring vision by the COP30 presidency, and also for highlighting this importance of implementing the outcome of the first global stocktake of the Paris Agreement, including this need to enhance efforts towards halting and reversing deforestation and forest degradation by 2030, and bringing the importance of all of this to everyone, in fact, and really making this not just a club of the climate people, but that, you know, this is affecting all of us, and we're all part of the solutions. So really bringing this closer to people's lives, that resonates beautifully. So we would like to introduce our second keynote speaker, another wonderful leader from Brazil, Cilia Chacriabá, the Indigenous activist and member of the Chamber of Deputies of Brazil, who will be joining us through a pre-recorded video. Cilia.
Os povos indígenas é uma das últimas alternativas para abarrar a crise climática. E reconhecido pela ONU, os povos indígenas no mundo são 5%, mas protegem 85% da sociobiodiversidade. As últimas pesquisas feitas pela universidade na Amazônia, no Cerrado, diz que os povos indígenas, todo o território que é protegido, beneficia diretamente o agronegócio brasileiro. Isso significa que demarcar território indígena, proteger os territórios indígenas, também é uma grande contribuição para a economia. E que na pesquisa realizada na Amazônia, de que 80% do agronegócio é beneficiado com 50% da chuva, e que se o Congresso Nacional não parar de votar projetos de retrocesso aos povos indígenas e o meio ambiente, o déficit de primeira hora na economia vai ser em torno de 338 bilhões. Vai custar muito mais caro para a economia o projeto da destruição. Por isso, nós lutamos por uma transição que não mata, uma transição econômica, uma transição energética, uma transição urgente, sobretudo em áreas críticas, onde tem mineração, como é o caso do estado de Minas Gerais, que matou 2 rios, o Rio Paraupeba e o Rio Doce. Muitas coisas o dinheiro pode trazer de volta, mas o dinheiro não traz um rio de volta. O dinheiro não traz a vida das pessoas que se foram de volta. E por isso nós lutamos por economia inteligente. Uma economia inteligente é uma economia que não nos mata. Nós enviamos uma proposta ao Ministério dos Povos Indígenas e ao Ministério do Meio Ambiente para que essa COP saia na carta final a agricultura indígena, a agroecologia indígena e os territórios indígenas como uma das principais ferramentas de enfrentamento à crise climática. Nós, o pessoal, somos autores de um projeto de lei que trata da tipificação de ecocídio. Se já fosse tipificado no Brasil, o marco temporal, assim como Mariana e Brumadinho, teria que ser julgado como um crime climático. Nós também temos uma PEC para reconhecer a natureza como sujeito de direito, inspirado na Constituição Federal da Bolívia e do Equador. Não basta achar os povos indígenas bonitos, não basta achar o canto dos povos indígenas bonito, não basta querer se curar com a medicina tradicional indígena, querer participar de ritual da Jurema e da Ayahuasca. É preciso que cada um assuma a responsabilidade de manter vivo, cuidar de pé e manter de pé o corpo, o território e a voz de quem canta. Não vai existir floresta de pé se os direitos dos povos indígenas continuar no chão. O chamado dos povos indígenas é o chamado da terra. É preciso que os líderes mundiais se comprometam e reconheçam que investir nos territórios indígenas e demarcar território indígena é a única possibilidade. E que não fazer isso, ignorar isso, inclusive ser contra a demarcação, é jogar essa solução fora. É urgente esse momento. Cuidar dos povos indígenas do território é cuidar da sua própria vida e do planeta. Nós não temos planeta B, não existe vacina para a crise climática. A vacina está na transformação da consciência, assim como na transição da economia. Mas, além da transição econômica, nós precisamos fazer transição política e transição humanitária. As pessoas precisam retomar um outro modo de viver que seja relacionada com o território, com a terra. A lei que também protege os povos indígenas e os defensores ambientais, é preciso que seja ratificada em todo o país o Acordo Escazú, porque é a lei que protege os protetores. Guardiões merecem ser guardados. E é preciso reconhecer, nessa urgência, que a Colômbia segue como o primeiro país que mais mata indígenas e defensores ambientais. E o Brasil segue em segundo lugar. Os povos indígenas é alternativa. Portanto, matar os povos indígenas é matar essa solução.
Thank you, Celia, for that incredible call to action, and I think we are learning that we don't talk about forest-based climate action without putting the rights and livelihoods of Indigenous peoples at the forefront, how long and how far we still have to go in terms of really supporting this central cause. So with that, I would like to bring up the first panel of speakers. The first panel is a digital panel, and we have really, again, 3 incredible speakers here today, and we're looking to COP30 and beyond, and from your perspectives. And so we have with us today Daniele Violetti, the Senior Director from the UNFCCC, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. We have Garo Batmanian, the Director General of the Brazilian Forest Service, and we have André Guimarães, the Executive Director of IPAM, the Amazon Environmental Research Institute in Brazil. And so I have a question for each of you, and we'd like to hear from you in turn. So I'll start with Daniele, and from the perspective of the UNFCCC, what can we expect at COP30 in relation to forests?
Thanks. Thanks, first of all, for having the UNFCCC Secretariat here with you and sharing a few points on my side. Well, I think that we all look forward to COP30 and as this unique opportunity to convene the climate change COP near the Amazon rainforest. But COP30, and we have heard just now the vision of the presidency, it's not just another conference. It should not be. This is really a moment to connect on the issues of forests and landscape. And we need to address how to halt deforestation and forest degradation, but not only for the climate, but also for biodiversity and local livelihoods. In this context, really must consider how to restore the carbon sequestration and other ecosystem services of degraded forest and landscapes. And we need to explore how to enable countries and all stakeholders to make progress on these matters in practice. Maybe there is a sense that there is not much in terms of negotiation relating to forest at COP30, but in general, there is the momentum around there and can really deliver through different means throughout the COP30 moment, very important outcomes. I also want to point the fact that this year marks 10 years of implementing REDD+, under Article 5 of the Paris Agreement. This is a very important milestone that really deserves a celebration and reflection. And this framework over the past decade really delivered. To date, over 60 countries have reported on initiating REDD+ activities, which cover approximately 1.7 billion hectares of forest. So we can already see that having the Paris Agreement being implemented delivers important achievement. And that's also the need for keep this momentum moving and really accelerate. One important element from this year already starting and has been mentioned earlier, it's the submission of the new NDC, so NDC 3.0. This is the moment in which it's so important that forests are at the center of climate action of all parties around the world. So by integrating ambitious forest-related targets within the NDCs, countries have really the potential to use that to mitigate climate change, adapt to climate change, protect biodiversity, and support sustainable livelihoods. So we have received a number so far, not yet a big number. There is time still, but what we need to do is that when the Secretariat comes beginning of October in our synthesis report, we can project to COP30 where we are in the process, how much we are on track for the 1.5 degrees alignment with the Paris Agreement. And of course, we believe altogether that forests can make an enormous difference in these NDCs and this target. So I stop here for now, and then we can come back on other issues that I think are relevant for this conversation. Thanks for now.
Thank you so much, Daniele, and thank you for really giving us the backbone of the Paris Agreement that gives us Article 5 on REDD+ and implementation around that, and then the NDCs 3.0, which is key indeed for this year.
Thanks for now.
Yep. So I will now turn to Garo. Garo, if you could tell us how Brazil is leading the way for forests in terms of forest stewardship and how that can be extended through the leadership of COP30. You're not only the Director General of the Brazilian Forest Service, you're also in the role of coordinating the Tropical Forest Forever facility, and that we've been talking about all day. So I know everyone here is also keen to hear what's innovative from your perspective about the TFFF. Over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. First, it's a pleasure to be back at the GLF. I used to attend a lot of them, and it's good to be there. Unfortunately, I'm not doing in person anymore, but it's great to participate on GLF it's a great initiative, and I'm glad to be part of it. On your question, unfortunately, we won't resolve all the problems, all the challenges of climate change by COP30. But Brazil wants to lead by example. Okay? So the first thing is that we have done a lot of actions at the domestic level that as a basket of activities, because there is not a single solution, that we hope to showcase at COP30 as examples that other countries can follow. So we just don't want to talk, we want to walk the talk. We have, I'm just going to say briefly, this administration decreased the deforestation from 11.6 thousand square kilometers in 2022. The last year of the previous administration to 6.3 thousand square kilometers in 2024. Sure, 6.3 is still a lot, but that's only 50. It's a 46% decrease in 2 years. We are now receiving again funds from the Amazon Fund. The Amazon Fund is one of the first REDD projects in the world. It was actually created before REDD was defined at Cancun and before the Paris Agreement. It's going on for 16 years, and now we can receive it again because the deforestation decreases. We also think that we have to value standing forests, so it's not only about command and control. So we have 1.3 million hectares of forest, which is under sustainable forest management. The vast majority of it FSC certified. We have a pipeline of another 5 million hectares over the next 3 years to also be concessions for sustainable forest management. Now, so once you do forest command and control, then you can value the forest, standing forest. Then we also have to do bioeconomy because not everything is timber. It goes without saying, but I want to make that point here. Then finally, or not finally, but then the other side of it is that what we do with the area that we lost. So we have launched a strong program to restore 12 million hectares by 2030. And that includes concessions for carbons, taking advantage of the market of the regulated carbon we have just created last year. And not forgetting what was just said, we also have to recognize the roles of the forest guardians, the forest dwellers. So we do have a program called Green Purse, which pays about $100 a month to 50,000 families which live below the poverty line in the forest, but they are the stewards of the forest and maintaining the forest. As more funds will become available, we certainly will adhere to other. We include other families. I don't know if you have a second question later on TFFF specifically, or should I talk about TFFF here?
I think you could mention the innovations around TFFF here.
Okay. So TFFF, the innovation is that once everybody reaches deforestation zero, we don't have emission reductions anymore, but the forest still needs to be paid. We need to maintain, we need to conserve. The job does not end if we control deforestation or even if we reach deforestation zero. So we need, we thought we need a mechanism that rewards not only for, in addition to what REDD does, which is reward for reducing flux, reducing emission, one that rewards for those that maintain the stock, the standing forest. So the first innovations were maintaining its stock. Second one is only for the countries that have already performed. So you have already the deforestation role below the average, the global average. The third one is that we have included a discount to further induce countries to continue pursuing this small deforestation. So for every hectare that the country losses by deforestation, it will lose it will forfeit $400 to $800 for every hectare deforested. So it's an incentive for them to do that. The other, I think it's very important, is that the countries must have the last two innovations, which I think are very important. The country must have their own systems, but the systems have to be transparent and it shouldn't be prone for political interference. Finally, that's on the programmatic side. Finally, we also say that 20% of the resources should go to the forest dwellers, for the indigenous people and the local communities, so that they can receive the just payment that they are due for the work they're doing protecting the forest. But so it goes to the countries as a grant, and they can disburse it as a grant directly without having to. This is not about creating a new green climate fund or GF where projects have to be designed, how many consultants you hire, etc. The money goes there, the government can disburse directly to protect the parks, etc. The last, and I think the most important or equally important innovation, is that we are not relying on donations. We want to create basically an investment fund, $125 billion investment fund. I'm not going to explain that here, but the investment fund will generate revenue every year. Of course, there are safeguards, there are caveats. We're not funding oil companies, etc. But the revenue from that, you're going to have it every year, and we'll be able to pay the countries for every hectare they have standing forever, basically. And because you only have to capitalize the investment fund once. Once you have the capital in, you make investments like any investment fund, and you disburse the revenues not to shareholders, you disburse the revenue for the forest holders, which are doing a good job. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that, and thank you for this message of how Brazil indeed is leading by example, including through the promotion of the Tropical Forest Forever facility. Now, finally, over to Andre. We all know that to work on forest-based solutions to the climate crisis, we can't just stay in the forests, of course. And IPAM has done some incredibly innovative work on improving synergies between agriculture and forestry towards enhancing food security while supporting climate action. If you could speak a bit to that and how COP30 can continue to support that important agenda as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Amy, for the invitation. I'm a great fan of GLF for a long time, just as Garo said, and I've been following the work, and I'm now feeling privileged to be part of, as IPAM is a member of the GLF, so I'm looking forward for future rounds of discussion on this subject, friends, forests, which in my view is probably among the 2 or 3 most important issues that we have to deal with as mankind in the decades to come. Not just to deal with climate change, but with food security, with other matters that we'll need for surviving on this planet in the future. So let me start, Amy, by echoing what Congresswoman Célia Chacriabá just said. And I would like to make 2 very clear statements here. Statement number 1 is there's no way we'll get to the 1.5 degrees centigrade without the tropical forests. If tropical forests are gone, forget about Paris Agreement. Amazonia alone, the Amazon basin alone, stores the equivalent of 10 years of global emissions. So if the Amazon is gone, I cannot even imagine the trouble that we are going to be in. Number 1. Number 2 is that without forests, without tropical forests, there's no way we're going to get food security, globally food security. And the reason for that is that somewhere around 40 to 50% of the food production globally comes from tropical countries. Most of that agriculture, and I can give you the number for Brazil, 90% of the Brazilian agriculture is not irrigated. It depends upon natural water cycles, which depend upon the maintenance of the integrity of tropical forests. So these things are all interconnected in my view. Let me quote a couple of recent data that we've been studying here at IPAM with partners with the Woodrow Climate Research Center, a Boston-based think tank. That first comment I want to make is that we have found that in central Brazil, in the Cerrado, in southern part of Amazonia, the higher the percentage of native vegetation in a farm, the higher the production of soy. So we begin to understand that these things are interconnected and they are interdependent. So that paradigm of getting rid of the native vegetation to perform agriculture or whatever, we need to change that paradigm into one in which the forests are part of the production system because they irrigate, because they provide natural enemies of insects, I mean, and many other services which are crucial for the crop. So point number one is that the more forests we have, the more production we have. And the second article that we are just putting together and will be submitted very soon has come to another interesting conclusion, which is for every 1 degree centigrade increase in temperature, soy loses 6% of its yield, once again in central Brazil, and corn loses 8% of its yield. And we have areas in Amazonia, in southern part of Amazonia and in Cerrado, which we have had already an increase in 4 degrees centigrades on average. So that means that planting soy and planting corn is probably not feasible anymore or not profitable anymore in those regions. That is a heads up for us to really focus on the importance of forests for the future of mankind, for climate change, for the the biodiversity that we might need in the future, for stabilizing the climate, for making sure that we have food enough to feed 8, 9, 10 billion people, which will be around in the next few decades. And to finalize, Amy, I would like to finalize and answering to the last point of your comment, which is what does it have to do with for COP30? I think everything. COP30 is going to be a COP happening in the Amazon. Not the Amazon COP, it's a COP happening in Amazonia. It's a COP happening in a tropical country. It's a COP happening in a tropical country that, according to the Minister of Agriculture, feeds about 1 billion people every day. So that gives, I think, the perspective and the opportunity for us to deepen up this kind of conversation, to enhance the scientific understanding of the interdependence between food security, climate change, and forests, and move on to the next level, folks. We need to restore millions and millions of hectares. We need to stop deforestation now. That costs a lot of money. If we put together all of the cooperation, international cooperation, and all the philanthropy money on the planet, that's just a fraction of what we need. So my last message here, and that's an expectation for COP30, Amy, is that we engage the financial sector, the private sector, the trade companies, and the private sector in general into efforts to prevent the worst. In other words, it's better to invest now in protecting forests than in the future in trying to find out ways to produce food for a growing population. I'll stop here for now, and thank you very much for the opportunity, Amy.
Thank you to all of you, and Andre, I think we are, from FAO's perspective, breaking this agriculture versus forestry issue is absolutely essential. It's forest for agriculture, for food security, and the like. So maybe in 1 minute or less, a take-home message that you each want to send to GLF forests, thinking of COP30 but beyond. Daniele.
Yeah, I think in addition to what I mentioned earlier as important pillars towards COP30, I would add the absolute need for financing for all these efforts, not only REDD+, but in general. And I think there are some positive signals out there in terms of funding possibilities or changing in opportunities. Not to mention also the movements in Article 6.4, so the markets and the movements that the supervisory body has introduced in terms of standards there. So I think we are seeing some important signals. So looking at the package, NDCs, forest ambition being boosted there, a REDD+ experience and building on that, and strong financial signals to create this unprecedented opportunity at COP30 and beyond, because COP30 can and should be the beginning of something for the next decade, having a forest at the center of it and the center of climate action. Thanks. Thanks again for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you so much. Garo, last words?
It's been 10 years since Paris. We have agreed on the rule books. We have agreed in a lot of details. We expect COP30 to be a year that we actually put all those things in action. Not that action is not taking, but to speed up the action, the course of action. And we hope that some of the examples that I mentioned here can inspire other countries and work with other countries so that we can speed up the process and hope that the money is there for this thing for these actions to take place. We need to start working faster after 10 years from Paris.
Indeed. Thank you. Andre?
Oh, I couldn't agree more with what Daniele and Garo just said, but let me put some spice here in the conversation. I think we are in front of a multiple challenge, but dealing with deforestation, for example, which I think is the #1 challenge that we should all pursue, has at least 2 dimensions. One is the reduction of deforestation per se, and that's done through command and control, that's done through punishments or application of the law. But the other dimension is keeping the deforestation down. This is a completely different ballgame. We need a completely different toolbox to keep the deforestation down. And keeping the deforestation down means replacing outdated and unsustainable activities such as extensive ranching, extensive agriculture, for a more sustainable land use type, and that requires investment. And that's why in my first comment, I mean, I said that I expect a lot in this COP30 that the private sector, the markets understand that protecting forests is not a contribution for a bunch of tree huggers. Sorry, my French here. It's an investment in the future of their business. That's the clarity that we need to have at COP30. We need hundreds of billions of dollars to keep forests, to restore forests, and that's not going to come up of the traditional means. TFF is going to be very important, and I'm an advocate of it. REDD+ is going to be very important, but that's not going to be enough. We need to understand that we need to engage the private sector and the markets into the efforts of protecting forests.
The mic is also tired. Yes. Great. Yeah, thank you all. A big round of applause for our speakers. And we wish you were here in person, but it's nice to see you online. So thank you for being here. And we'll see you in Belém. Great. So before we move to our in-person panel, we do have a special moment, again, hearing from young and local voices from GLF's restoration stewards and the GLFX chapters, who will be sharing their call to action on what we need to do to restore and protect our forests. So we will play that as we transition to the panel.
The next decade will be a defining moment for global forests. Across the world, it is the communities who live closest to the land who are leading the way, restoring ecosystems, protecting biodiversity, and shaping a better future. What should we learn from them and apply now? What must we do together to restore and protect living forests before it's too late?
Mopianaldo, my name is Robert from Salumayag Youth Collective for Forest. We need to protect old growth forests because these ancient ecosystems are irreplaceable. They store vast amounts of carbon, support rich biodiversity, and sustain indigenous cultures. Once lost, they will be gone forever. We must support community-led conservation, especially by youth and indigenous groups, as they have proven to be some of the world's most effective land stewards. By defending their land rights and amplifying their voices, we can keep them and their landscapes safe.
The peri-urban mangroves of Kenya are vital and yet threatened. For our next decade, we need to embrace ecosystem-based approaches to ensure that we rehabilitate our mangroves without just planting. Sedimentation is one of the factors that is rendering our rehabilitation efforts futile. In order to address this, we need to encourage regenerative agriculture in the upland areas where the communities live to prevent their soil erosion runoff.
La población se ha vuelto insensible y egoísta ante el valor absoluto de nuestros bosques, enfocándose solo en su satisfacción personal. Necesitamos sensibilizar y cambiar la perspectiva de la población, mostrándoles el valor de la naturaleza y el rol que cumplen los pueblos indígenas en su preservación. Pero tenemos que trabajar con acciones tangibles. Para esto es necesaria la inversión financiera para una intervención oportuna en los territorios depredados.
Bonjour, nous de l'ONG Fandrocandu, Madagascar, GLFX para Caraïbes. Imaginez une forêt défrichée par des villageois sans autre ressource pour leur survie. Pourtant, vous savez, nous pouvons changer cela en les aidant dans leur initiative de changement vers des techniques agricoles durables sans défrichement et des activités éco-responsables. Parce qu'en les aidant, nous nous aidons nous-mêmes pour la planète et la future génération. Merci d'avoir écouté nos communautés.
Para que nuestros esfuerzos sean efectivos, necesitamos crear y promover modelos de negocio que demuestren que conservar nuestros bosques es más rentable que destruirlos. La conservación solo será efectiva en la medida en que genere alternativas económicas para las comunidades, mejorando su calidad de vida. Asimismo, necesitamos recuperar nuestras inteligencias ancestrales, volver a los métodos de producción y construcción de nuestros antepasados, fomentando nuestras identidades territoriales y el sentido de que somos parte de la naturaleza como una extensión de ella.
The next decade is crucial for Indonesia's forests. Supporting local communities through inclusive policies and sustainable practices means expanding land access and embracing community-driven decision-making. Policies must reflect local realities, prioritize long-term sustainability, and strengthen grassroots initiatives. Partnerships should not only involve governments and academics, but also local communities, who are vital in forest management. These forests aren't just pixels on a map, they're landscapes bound together with people's lives.
Action was never so important like now to avoid climate change and protect our forests. Living in harmony in nature is one of the best solutions. My name is Nondas, I'm from Brazil and I live here in the Cerrado region of the north of Minas Gerais. Here we have an amazing biodiversity, animals and plants that only survive in this ecosystem. And now we have been collecting thousands of seeds and species to restore this ecosystem again.
Great. Congratulations to those restoration stewards who are really the inspiration at the center of the GLF. Our final panel, I'd like to call up, it's a very special panel, so thank you for being here and thank you for sticking with us. We have three speakers and I'd like to call them up one by one. The first is Ms. Shubhra Bhattacharjee, the Director General of FSC International, the Forest Stewardship Council. A round of applause. We have Mr. Jose Campos, CEO of the Sustainable Agriculture Network. And we have Suzy Gabi Diaz-Gonzalez, Indigenous lawyer and Executive Director of Bari Wesna. Suzy is also coordinator for GLF-X Pishis Pachetea chapter. Welcome. So in fact, this is maybe easy, and this is just one question, the same question for all of you, because we've talked about the challenge. We are living in a challenging moment. This is clear, and it can get overwhelming, and we have to sometimes come back and say, well, wait, I have my focus, I have my priority, I have my action, and that's what we want to hear today, and not only from our speakers on the stage, but also to you who are tuning in virtually. This is your time in the chat to also answer this question, which is, what specific strategies and actions do you see as essential for the next decade to drive meaningful change in your field, from your perspective and your priorities? So I'd like to ask, of course, virtual participants, please start typing in your answers. We want to hear from you, and we'll start with Shubhra.
Thank you, Amy. GLF, so good to be here with you today. Panelists, so good to be here with you. So you heard from Andre and our other speakers the importance of finance. all the public finance that is available, Andre said, is a fraction of what is needed. Now, let's look at some numbers we know, the numbers we usually throw around. What is the production value of the global forests? On average, it's about $1.5, $1.6 trillion a year, right? And we talk about what? About 18 million people employed. Those are numbers we know. What is not quantified is the amount of carbon sequestered, the number of lives saved because the heating is contained, the water, the sickness that is averted, and think about it, the floods that don't happen because there's a forest in the way, the cyclone that does not destroy because there's a forest in the way, that's not quantified. So looking ahead, that not quantified bit, the cyclone slowed down, the flood that does not happen, the people that do not die, how do we protect that? Because there's no market for that. That's where the $1.5 trillion of private sector activity come in. So how do we leverage that? You heard Alice say that we are in a very strange point in time. And the one word, if I were to describe it, is polarization and mistrust. From my perspective, FSC, you know FSC as a standard setter for voluntary compliance. The other part of FSC is that we are a platform for dialogue. In these polarized times, I would say the first value added is bringing people around the table to dialogue, to agree on what is important and what needs to be done. In FSC, you could have a furniture maker from Australia sitting at the table with an environmental NGO, a large environmental global NGO, 2-3 large forestry companies, big companies, sitting together as equals, discussing, agreeing on, disagreeing, having very difficult conversations, because this is where interests collide. FSC creates the platform for that. When the interests don't align, our responses don't leave the table, let's talk it out. So that's the first thing that is needed. Trust building and conversation. The second is voluntary compliance, that 1.5 trillion, imagine if that were to be channeled in a way that is responsible. So we stand for responsible forest management, which we say is economically viable, because that has to work. Incentives have to work. Socially beneficial and environmentally appropriate. So voluntary compliance, but that needs to work in complementarity with mandatory regulations. I was in Brazil earlier this week, and you've heard Garo speak. It is wonderful how the government has put in place very strong, very progressive regulations. The regulatory framework really works. Within that framework, private companies, either as forest owners or concession holders from the government, are operating, sometimes with FSC certification, sometimes without, but within that complementarity works so well. And having private sector forests are protecting the boundaries, reducing deforestation. So that complementarity needs to work. So that's the second thing, complementarity of voluntary and mandatory standards. And the third thing is multi-stakeholder engagement. I said governments and the private sector, then there are NGOs, then there are individual citizens, then there are our partners in FSC, Indigenous peoples groups, local communities. When they come together, that is a complementarity that can achieve what Alicia mentioned, bringing climate action down to the ground, down to the communities, down to the people. That I would say are the three things we need for the future.
Jose, from your perspective.
Yes,
Well, thank you very much. I'm so glad to be here again, and especially this place and with the GLF. And I'm a forester, but I'm going to talk about another sector which is so important, which I'm joined recently, which is agriculture. And I think I see too, everything that has been discussed been so interesting. What I see is growing challenges and also growing technologies, knowledge. It seems that as those solutions grow, the challenge gets farther away. But I see two things have been mentioned in several occasions, stakeholders that for me are critical, is the local communities with all those people in those landscapes, the landscape approach with the local communities, but supporting them or them taking the driver's seat, deciding what to do in those landscapes and developing what we call common territorial agendas, where we as external could help them with data and knowledge for them to make their own plans, but them making the plans and taking control of those landscapes. We have worked in those areas, seen beautiful examples, helping them developing tools for them to be in charge of monitoring those plans. They are the ones collecting data. And so important in making data a powerful element of the negotiation. And then comes the other stakeholder, which is the private sector. In this case, sourcing from agribusinesses. We are working with those companies as well. And they are investing money because they depend. Agriculture depends on having healthy soils, having healthy landscapes, and they are investing. And so many of those companies have what they call responsible sourcing programs. And the responsible sourcing program is where they establish metrics and kinds of ways how they source their commodities, which is basically a top-down approach because they do it. So what we're now doing with communities is helping them to have this top-down approach meet with a bottom-up approach. So where communities will, through what we call community-based monitoring and assurance systems, they will measure, they will have metrics about the performance of how they are producing those commodities. So that would attract those agribusinesses to go there because it would be easier for them to report back on their sustainable or responsible sourcing programs.
Yeah, thank you so much. And finalmente, this is a bilingual panel, Spanish and English, but you're all ready with your translation, I know. So for Susie, la misma pregunta, pero ¿cómo pueden los objetivos forestales globales alinearse mejor con las perspectivas indígenas y de base? Gracias.
Buenas tardes a todos y a todas. Bueno, voy a hablar en español, aunque tampoco no es mi idioma nativo. Yo hablo idioma, mi propio idioma, pero bueno, tuve que aprender el español para poder comunicarme también con los demás. Primero, agradecer a GLF por la invitación. Es un honor estar aquí. Como ya lo mencionó, mi nombre es Susi Díaz González. Yo soy indígena del pueblo Shipibo-Conibo y vengo de la Amazonía peruana, donde pues estamos a 30 o más grados y ya se imaginarán que estoy sufriendo mucho con es un cambio climático muy fuerte para mí. Pero igual estoy muy contenta de estar aquí con ustedes esta tarde. Respecto a la pregunta, yo debo iniciar, quería también señalar que vengo en representación de la Asociación Intercultural Barriosna, de la cual estoy dirigiendo, ¿no? Decía que un informe reciente sobre Perú señala que entre 2015 y 2022 nuestro país perdió 773,000 hectáreas de bosque, o sea, aproximadamente. Y esto un poco derivado a la deforestación por el cambio de uso de suelos, ¿no? Que justamente se cambia para hacer agricultura principalmente. Y estos se ubican principalmente en territorios indígenas. De allí nuestra preocupación. ¿Y por qué nos preocupa enormemente? Ya que nuestro Estado, en lugar de implementar políticas para detener esa deforestación o crear estrategias para seguir mejorando este aspecto, no lo está haciendo. Más bien está implementando, está creando políticas, está creando leyes que promueven la deforestación, promoviendo economías agrícolas, como por ejemplo el cultivo de cacao, el cultivo del café, el cultivo de palma aceitera, ¿no? Que está llegando mucho a nuestros territorios. Me olvidé que hay un traductor, está hablando muy rápido, así que voy a tratar de disminuir. En ese sentido es nuestra preocupación, porque esto no va a acabar, se sigue aumentando. Yo estoy hablando de estos datos, pero seguramente hay datos más actualizados y seguramente son mucho más. ¿Y por qué también nuestra preocupación? Como yo decía, muchos de estos están en territorios indígenas. Muchos de estos territorios no cuentan con títulos de propiedad que nos garanticen nuestros derechos. Muchos tenemos que pasar años solicitando ese documento sobre nuestros territorios ancestrales. Y como no existe este documento que garantiza nuestros territorios, nuestros derechos territoriales, lo que hace el Estado es justamente otorgar derechos a otros sobre estas tierras, sobre estos territorios, ¿no? Que pueden ser empresas o personas naturales, como nosotros le llamamos, ¿no? Ellos lo que buscan es hacer actividades productivas, como ya les decía, ¿no? Cultivar cacao, que está muy de moda. Ahora, palma aceitera, ¿no? O sea, el gobierno dice, vamos a dar trabajo y necesitamos, ¿no? La agricultura. Pero nosotros vivimos en una región que es bosque siempre. Entonces, a cambio de eso, para hacer agricultura, se tendría que tumbar muchas hectáreas de bosque. Y no solamente esas actividades, ¿no? Que se convierte o que como que están entre paréntesis en forma legal, sino también están disfrazadas de otras actividades ilegales, como por ejemplo el sembrío de hojas de coca que está entrando en nuestros territorios. Hojas de coca no para medicina, sino destinados al narcotráfico. Una de las cosas, además de la deforestación y todas las implicancias, es lo que está generando en nuestros territorios, es la amenaza por defender nuestros territorios. Muchos de nuestros líderes, lideresas, se encuentran en situaciones de riesgo justamente a partir de las defensas de sus territorios, ¿no? O sea, en represalia por la defensa es que son amenazados y muchos de ellos también han sido asesinados. Ucayali, la región de donde yo vengo, es la región que tiene el mayor número de defensores asesinados, lo cual convierte una de las regiones mucho más peligrosa. En ese sentido, considero que es muy importante para alcanzar los objetivos forestales tener en cuenta lo siguiente. Primero, garantizar nuestros derechos territoriales indígenas mediante la titulación y la georreferenciación, y para lo cual los estados, bueno, en este caso el Estado peruano debería garantizar un recurso, un fondo para ello, porque parece que no hay eso. Y también adecuar sus leyes con los estándares internacionales. Segundo, ampliar y asegurar el financiamiento para la restauración gestionada por actores locales, por comunidades que estamos en territorios, ¿no? Se está promoviendo mucho, he estado escuchando de todas las mañanas, muchas actividades, pero es muy fácil hablar desde las oficinas, es muy fácil hablar de tan lejos. Sin embargo, las realidades en nuestros territorios es distinto. Es necesario tener en cuenta todas esas particularidades para crear, para diseñar e implementar políticas Tercero, implementar iniciativas que dinamicen las economías locales legales. Es muy difícil competir con las economías ilegales en nuestros territorios. Es como decir, ellos nos pueden decir, nosotros podemos promover, hay que reforestar, hay que hacer actividades diferentes, pero ellos van a optar por el camino del sembrío de la hoja de coca para el narcotráfico porque es mucho más rentable. Es muy difícil competir con esas actividades. Entonces, si realizamos o implementamos actividades económicas locales, legales, también estaremos aliviando la presión sobre nuestros bosques, ¿no? Y finalmente, pues, insisto, fortalecer la colaboración directa con los actores locales, organizaciones indígenas, asociaciones, organizaciones de mujeres que estamos en los territorios, que conocemos nuestros territorios. Podemos ser los pueblos indígenas con nuestros conocimientos, también mezcladas con las de ustedes, actores importantes, ser aliados fundamentales para luchar contra la deforestación y recuperar los ecosistemas. Muchas gracias.
Yeah, thank you for that message, very clear message on putting Indigenous people's rights and livelihoods and opportunities at the center of what we're doing over the next decade and beyond. 1 minute closing from each of you. What message do you want to send to the GLF community for defining the next decade as relates to forests? Shubhra.
Building on what my co-panelists said, the voices of those who have skin in the game, local communities, indigenous peoples, those are the ones that must define the global agenda. That's it.
Well, I'm building on what you mentioned before. Collaboration is key. Once I read that in an anthropological paper, that perhaps the most important single factor for the success of the human species was, thousands of years ago, its capacity to collaborate. We are in that situation now. We need to collaborate radically and then challenge the economic development paradigm, which is, we have a broken economic development paradigm. We are putting trillions of dollars in subsidies to agriculture, to oil. We need to change that.
Sally.
Sí, bueno, yo creo que es importante tener en cuenta que los bosques no solamente es madera, no solamente son animales, no solamente son ecosistemas, son gente, somos nosotros los pueblos indígenas que vivimos ahí. Entonces, cuando se implementa o se diseñan políticas públicas, hay que pensar, además de la madera y todo lo que hay en la gente, ¿no? Y también justamente coordinar, consultar con ellos para ver de qué forma pues trabajamos para mejorar y lograr nuestros objetivos. Y finalmente, igual trabajar con los actores locales, y para ello también tenemos que adecuar las políticas, reducir también los estándares internacionales también que nos piden los cooperantes, los cuales muchas veces es muy difícil de lograr, ¿no? Eso, muchas gracias.
Gracias, Susie. Thanks to all of you. A big round of applause. And we are at our final closing keynote. So I'll invite all of us to leave the stage. And I think our final speaker of the day probably needs no introduction, but I'll introduce him anyway. Dr. Robert Nassi, my former Director General at CIFOR, he's now the Director General, he's still the Director General at CIFOR and the Director of Science at CIFOR ECRAF, but no longer my Director General, unfortunately. But over to you, Robert, for closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. And it's always very difficult to come at the end of many presentations And you have two choices. I mean, it's either you do something that has been carefully drafted to you, or you just go completely I will try to do something in between. I mean, I started working in 1981. Probably many of you were not born yet. I mean, and as a forester, since I started working in 1981, we have lost 550 million hectares of forest. So as a forester, it's not a very good result. And when I started, I mean, I remember very clearly that my professor of silviculture in the school said, last year we had 12 girls in the promotion, and that was like the pink peril, like the yellow peril. And forestry is too important to be treated by any other than foresters. So forestry for foresters, and you keep the tourists outside, I mean, you don't bother. We are in a bit of a different situation now, and fortunately, but still, I mean, I think that, and I was very inspired by Ariel's talk this morning, we should all be diagnosticians, sorry if I think properly. So what's the diagnostic? So I've asked one of these, crazy artificial intelligence things that you have on your phone these days. What will happen if we lose 50% of our forest? That's a diagnostic. And I will not talk about carbon. I mean, I hate these things about trees. But just to say, the machine says, well, you are going to lose about vital ecosystem services worth about 120 trillion annually, including pollination, pest control, disease regulation. You are going to have a fractured hydrological cycle that will slash rainfall by 25–40% in critical agricultural zone and displace 400 million forest-dependent people. You are going to have zoonotic pandemics with surge at wildlife and man contact trappers, compounding malnutrition from collapsed wild food system and soil sterilization across 450 million hectares of farmland. Economy will hemorrhage 2.6 trillion yearly from climate disaster. And finally, you will render vast region uninhabitable and halve humanity carrying capacity by 2021. Diagnostic. So once you have this diagnostic, what do you do with that? And it's very easy to say, okay, that we are all doomed to just go back in the rain and just throw itself in the river. But in fact, the prescription is pretty simple. And we have been talking about that. Halting deforestation, okay, and restoring 350 million hectares of forest, tropical forests, that will generate about $170 billion annually in benefits by ecosystem services. That will create 100,000 of jobs. That will contribute significantly to reduced temperature. So 350 million hectares reforested, we change the atmospheric temperature of the soil by 1 degree. So that means instead of overshooting the 1.5 degree by 1, you are overshooting the 1.5 degree by less than 1. So, and improve water quality and so on. So we have the solution. And I think that what we are facing now is having, and that many of the discussions, like our colleague from IPAM said that you should stop being the tree hugger, saying the sort of, we need to have this diagnostic shared by everybody, realizing that no one is going to win if we continue to do what we are doing. This is a lose-lose for everybody, be it someone from the far right, from the far left. If you are living on this planet, if we continue doing what we are doing, everybody is going to lose. And so until we share this diagnostic, it's impossible to find a solution, because like Jose was saying, I mean, sort of, you have vested agenda, you have a broken system. So, and I think that as our job as scientists and as this community of GLF, we have not been very good at sharing this diagnostic, and we should be better at that, and we should be saying that, okay, this is serious, but there are solutions. And these solutions are relatively simple. I mean, they are not going to solve everything, but they are going to solve a lot of things, and they are going to buy us more time until we find other solution. I have nothing against direct air capture. I mean, it's not working now at scale, So, and we have this polarization of left, right, wrong, direct air capture, natural-based solution. We seem to be unable to have this holistic view of the thing we should do, we can do, and we have the tools. So if I have only one thing to do, and this is where something like the GLF is very important, because it brings people from all over the place, from all over horizons, and we should be able to use GLF, I would say, to create this community that has a shared understanding of the diagnostic and the thing to do against this. And this is one of the GLF. It has been a very successful, very nice meeting. And I have the number, because you are, we had about 4,000 people watching from 145 countries, 185 people here in Bonn in this very nice setting, a campaign that has reached 8 million people on social media, 105 speakers, of which 53 women, 65 from Africa, Latin America, and Asia, 47 partner organizations. So I think we all share the diagnostic here. I mean, so the question is how going to spread the things to other people. And I think that is where it is important that we should think not in terms of country, we should think in terms of building a movement. And I think that was the idea originally. Let's build a movement in terms of, and put things in this movement saying that, okay, this is what we share a planet, we share the issue, we share the diagnostic, we have the solution, we implement the solution together. So now we have the choice, I mean, sort of, either we do a big step forward in the ravine, or we do a big step forward toward the solution. And I think that my choice, of course, would be to be a big step forward toward the solution. And I'm sure that GLF and the thing that we do will contribute to that, to the extent we can, but something that is significant and much more significant than other people will believe. So, and I'm closing by thank you to our generous sponsor, because although money is not all, it's very important, to the Norwegian Agency for Development Corporation, for sponsoring the conference and co-hosting this event with C4 ICRAF, and also to all the GLF donors, sponsor, Government of Germany by BMZ, BMUV, IKI, the Luxembourg government, FOLUR, Jeff, the International Model Forest Network, the Government of Canada and the Robert Burns Foundation, and also all the GLF people, folks, without nothing having possible. Thank you very much.